Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. GT, we're going to have to talk to Mark 2 weeks in a row. Not sure what's going on with that guy. He said he got on the train at 3 o'clock this morning. So we are disappointed as usual to not have him. We will try to hold it down. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, just moving and grooving, brother. Moving and grooving.
You get a weekend where you're not on a plane? Is that the case this weekend?
Yeah, this week, buddy. Be good. I mean, yeah, I get to spend a little bit of Memorial Day weekend back in Iowa, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, for sure. So lots of things going on. There's news in Iowa, but let's start in Stillwater. So I literally spoke yesterday to both Ed Gallegos, who is the treasurer of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and to Tyler Caldwell, a guy that we're both very good friends with. Was talking to him about another event and seeing if any of the OSU wrestlers would be interested. Got a chance to congratulate him. I am happy for Tyler, really happy for Tyler. I am also a little bit surprised that he was kept. You kind of thought that Taylor would completely clean house, and he had hired a recruiting coordinator in Pearsall, and that was Caldwell's previous role with Oklahoma State. So I know you talk to a lot of these schools on the regular basis, just in your role as with Nike, basically, not as anything to do with our podcast, but, tell me about your thoughts on Caldwell as a coach, how he fits in with these other guys, and then I can kind of tell you what he had told me a little bit last night.
Well, I think one of the biggest things coming out of Stillwater is that the staff is now kind of completed as it sits right now. There's a whole aspect of the RTC and how that's all going to be basically done moving forward and all that kind of thing. But David Taylor, Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman, Tyler Caldwell, Brian Pearsall, and I'm not sure. And once again, I think that there still hasn't been anything decided about director of operations for Oklahoma State, which would be another position if there is a total shift of previous regime, from Coleman and John to now David's staff. I think probably one of the bigger things when it comes to Caldwell and being him on official assistant coach is that from conversations with athletes and or donors, is it everybody loved everybody there. So it's not like it's, you got to put a little caveat on there, but I think
that's important. Yeah.
A lot of the athletes really, really liked Caldwell. So I think, keeping that kind of continuity, because a lot of the athletes we really like this guy, whatever, probably speaks volumes for what he's done. And once again, if you haven't been around Caldwell or talked to him or been around him much, that speaks volumes to have David be like, hey, I think this is a good move for me to keep you here. So I think as you look at that staff, as Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman, Tyler Caldwell, Brian Pearsall,
DT.
That's a freaking young nucleus of coaches.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, you and I are friends from all the way back when I was coaching and doing 100% of the recruiting for my dad's team, and talking to guys like you, like the Mark Ostranders, the Terry Packs, the Lee Pritzes of the world, the Frank Beasleys, the guys that were really, really good recruiters or still are, talked to Daryl Thomas yesterday from SIU Edwardsville. He's asking me about a couple of kids. Recruiting is so chronically underrated in other sports. It's not like Nick Saban knew more plays than somebody else did at another school. I mean, they got a ton of 5-stars. And to have Caldwell not only completely agree about his relationship with the kids, completely agree about a thread of continuity, to kind of rephrase what you said, But to have a second recruiting guy, a guy that likes to call, likes to pick up the phone, that is good at it, that has built connections all over the country, and that can only be an additional asset. That is only an additional asset that two people want to do the job that is critically important. I mean, you and I know this. Every coach thinks they're better than the last coach somebody had. Like there's a complete sense of, hey, you used to wrestle for Mark, now you wrestle for me. I'll do a better job. Hey, you used to wrestle for David, now you're wrestling for Grant. Well, Grant will do a better job. Like we all, and it's coaches should think that. They should think they're better than the last coach. Otherwise, how can they expect to get results? Like they have to have that belief in themselves. But the ability to recruit is unquestionably a key part of the recipe or the formula. So really good get by them. You mentioned the DOPS position. I don't even know who the current DOPS person is.
Kelly Scheffler is the current director of operations for Oklahoma State.
Okay, I do know Kelly. Yeah, she's super cool. So it'll be interesting to see. They may bring somebody in and move her to a different type of role. I mean, she's incredibly loyal and a very hardworking person and a really good human being. So the RTC coach, rumors have have been abundant. I think the most, well, you know what? I won't say. I just think there's a lot of options and feel like maybe that announcement comes after the Olympics. So certainly, to quote Stephen A. Smith, a plethora of people available for that role.
Yeah, the great Stephen A. Smith. Bring in a reference into the wrestling world. Let's go. Bring on Stephen A. I love that.
A veritable plethora.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. So one of the things that Taylor mentioned that we didn't get to last week, and I thought he said it, the two things he said, one of them is kind of quoting Kale, is it's a game. We like this game. We're going to be good at this game. I think that, and you and I talk a lot about business and other things, but like, hey, we just got to it's a puzzle. We got to figure it out. It's a Rubik's Cube. Like, how do we create a win-win here? And I think that's mentality is a little different. It's taking a business mindset and applying it to wrestling scenarios. Like, hey, I'm in this seatbelt position and you're taller than me, but I can't help it. I can't just get out of it. Now, there's no way to just kind of retract myself. How do I either win or get to a position where I don't lose? And, they're playing around with it and things like that. But the other thing that he said multiple times was having a system and the importance of a system, and that when things get rough, you have confidence in your system. And I think that's really interesting. And as a guy that's currently coaching and coaches alongside, and I don't want to slight your other assistant coaches, okay? So I know how great your staff is, but one of the great head coaches in the country, period, regardless of class. And you know how I feel about Reedy and Henderson and everybody else. So please, respect to the whole squad. But just as a leader, how important is do you see system working?
Well, I think if you look at anything when it comes to either a club, the really good high school programs around the country that are consistently like in the top 50 all the time, they have a very good system, right? So a very good, training regime. This is what we do. This is where we go. This is how we do it. And once again, that's why, the Blairs of the world have always been Blair. Like they're like Lake Highland Prep continually being a top 50 program all the time. There's a system, there's a continuity to what they do, how they do it, and all those other things. I think the same thing when it comes to the collegiate aspect. You see the places that are like having consistent success, regardless of like they just have a really good leader, like Wartburg with Jim Miller, consistently just, they're always there. And then that has now transitioned to Keller, and Keller is doing a really great job with Wartburg, and they're consistently staying in that same system and how they do it. I think that once again, to single out some of the other programs across the country, like you're always like Central Oklahoma is always a Division II powerhouse. They're always in the hunt They're always trying to win a national title. They're always kind of in that same thing. I would say the same thing with like UNK, St. Cloud, the Division III. It's like Wartburg, Augsburg as like perennial powerhouses, but that doesn't say that other, like Johnson and Wales and all these other places, or Baldwin Wallace, all of these other colleges that kind of are consistent there. They always have a good leader at the beginning or whatever it is. And if you go to the Division I ranks, the people that have the most consistent, I would say, performances are those people that have that great leader at the top, right?
Yeah.
Cale's been a juggernaut at Penn State. Consistency, like his assistant coaches have this is the first shakeup of anybody basically coming from that place. And it's not even part of his staff. It's just one of his wrestlers that is leaving. DT was not a part of the staff.
Kennedy was, though.
Kennedy was.
Yeah.
But I think that, even with like Tom Brand's, he's been a mainstay for however long, like Tom Ryan, he's been the leader of Ohio State for a long time.
Yeah.
And once again, consistently great. Sean Bourmet, another great coach.
Yeah.
I think as we kind of both are Iowa State alumni, like, Bobby was consistent, right? And then, KJ came in, and now Dresser's brought it back to like where I think the Iowa State faithful had basically wanted it to stay.
Yeah, you're in the top 5 and you beat Iowa. Just because
like,
they didn't hand out a 4th place trophy this year doesn't mean the people in Ames are probably pretty freaking thrilled. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that like as you have those figurehead type roles, when Rob Cole's at Cornell, like consistently. Now they have Mike Gray, which is part of that staff that has kept that continuity there. So I think that when you look at the staff to bring what we're talking about with Oklahoma State, and then what we'll kind of get into when it comes to the other openings and positions that are available in the country, is that continuity of staff like really leverages itself for you to like build your nucleus, and this is how we do things here.
So specifically, you mentioned a lot of great schools and programs, and like, for example, like in another sport, Jim Harbaugh just left Michigan after winning a national title, and I think they've hired within, but like if that guy doesn't get it done, I don't mean like win a national title, but be consistently in the playoffs, consistently beating Ohio State, they'll make a change. Like there's certain universities that certain sports are really important to them. Okay. And Oklahoma State is a program that has had long, decades of excellence in wrestling. So I completely agree with that. One of the things I was curious about, though, was did you think that when he says system, like, hey, we're going to have 2 or 3 collar tie scenarios that we like to use consistently, or there's, a couple breakdowns or mat returns we're going to always use? Is there a couple ways we're always going to defend single leg? Do you think it's that, or do you think it's more of we have to win? We have to be able to win in short offense when we shoot. We have to be able to win in short offense when we get shot on. We have to ride for 30 seconds. We have to be able to get out in 30 seconds. We're going to show you the 4 ways in these scenarios that we think is best. You're going to apply the one that works best with your style, and you're going to get great at it. Which along those lines, which one do you think is kind of more likely to be what he means by system?
Well, I think once again, I think this is a very extremely high level conversation with the wrestling nerds of the world, is like,
yeah,
what's more better, or I shouldn't say, that's really bad English right there.
What's more better?
All right. What is the better approach, position or specific technique? Like, hey, do we get into an underhook scenario and then like, hey, this is the only things that you guys can do from here, or hey, get there and then see what develops. Now I'll give you 100 different things for you to think about. But like, it's position wrestling rather than like, hey, I need to get here in order to hit my technique. So I think we could debate that for like 3 shows in specific.
Sure. And I'm just asking how you think he's approaching it. Like, is it?
Oh no, and I think that what lends itself to my comment would be, it has to be both. Sure. You have to like have a specific technique response that like, hey, and I think more so high schools do this. Like, hey, we do cradles, we do this and we do this really well. I think in college, I think it's like expanding to be like, hey, we can do all of these things. It's not just specific technique. So I think what DT's probably saying, and once again, just as my own opinion, is I think that it's a concept of like, hey, you need to be able to go get a takedown in 10 seconds. You've also got to be able to got to be able to ride a guy for 30 seconds, no matter what. I don't care how you do it. You want to throw in legs, you want to do crab, you want to do this, and this, but you have to be able to do this. I think that's more of the conceptual concept of whatever our system is.
Yeah. And when you say position, like I sort of use that interchangeably with situation, right? Like I was coaching some guys in jiu-jitsu last night and they get to this position and I'm like, look, if you're winning, just stay here. If you're losing, you can go here and you might be able to finish the fight, but the guy also might be able to, hip heist out and you're back to 50-50. But it's worth it if you're losing by a lot of points. It's like in wrestling, like, hey, if you're losing by 7, there's a chance here you could get a pin. If you're winning by 4, just stay here because the guy's not going anywhere for a while. So I think it'll be interesting. I think Penn State has done a really good job of bringing back like techniques that people hadn't used in a while, like that back ankle trip. That was the thing like Fittery did back when he was wrestling David Taylor. And but I think those coaches, as much as anyone, I don't say more, but as much as anyone, are studying current and previous technique and trying to either revive things or apply things that they think will work. And the other huge advantage that they have is they're not watching these international meets secondhand. I mean, they're there and they're and you are too. Like, I mean, like you're in the back and you're watching people like spar or play wrestle or situational 50-50s. And by 50-50s, I mean, like you're going 50, I'm going 50, and we're just kind of playing through the position. And they're really smart guys. I mean, all 4 or 5 of those people that are traveling there, like now, like it's Varner, Kale, Casey, Cody, and then like Mark McKnight or whoever else. I mean, it was also Jimmy Kennedy. They're being exposed to things firsthand, and they're exposing other people to what they're doing firsthand. And that's a lot different than like, oh, we're watching this on UWW or Flow. I mean, I know we've had this conversation, but like when you go to a wrestling meet, most of the value you get out of going to the wrestling meet is not watching the wrestling. Like it's talking to people, it's building relationships, it's starting productive conversations, it's doing things to advance the sport and advance, in this case, your company, or in my case, like my role in the sport, helping build the having productive conversations. So if you just want to watch the wrestling, just get a subscription to everything and a comfortable couch and a big TV, right? Like, so I think there's a bunch of different ways to kind of view that, but it's super interesting. So tied to Oklahoma State, Wyatt Hendrickson commits. I think it was pretty well known by the people in the wrestling community, but a government official from Oklahoma helped Hendrickson get the paperwork through so that he could get this extra year and then serve in the wrestling capacity. And that person was tied to Oklahoma State. So they definitely had a leg up in it. It was interesting, though, when he called off the visit to Mizzou right after the visit to Michigan, it kind of felt like, well, it was either Oklahoma State all along or the offer and visit to Michigan was so good. He's like, okay, I don't need to make the last trip, right? So what I have done here, let's see, let me pull this up. Okay, so let me present. All right, GT. So this, if you're not watching at home and just listening, we have listed what the 10 guys from Oklahoma State did last year. It's basically copied straight off of track wrestling and then just put their scores in instead of, who they wrestled in each round. The second column is how many placing points they had. The third column is how many bonus points they had. And then the fourth column is their total. Then next to that is who I think might wrestle there this coming year and projected points. So, for example, Spratley scored 2 points. They were both placement points, no bonus points, for a total of 2. and Spratley or Sakamoto is probably going to be the starter this coming year, and on down the line. So I don't think a lot of people think of it this way, GT, but when I think of Hendrickson coming to Oklahoma State, I see him literally replacing Fix's points. And I clearly know they're not in the same weight class, but okay, last year Doucette scored 1.5 points and Fix scored 17.5. And last year Hendrickson scored 17.5. So if you think Cale Hughes can score 1.5, they're basically right where they were last year on those two weights. If you think Dean Hamidi can replace Olenek's points, then whoever they wrestle at 65, he can score 0 and still be the same as Braden Thompson. So last year they scored 56 points. I'll quickly read out loud what I did, and then I'm interested in GT and plugging you in. So I have Spratley scoring 2 like last year, round of 12. Don't necessarily know if he'll get a bunch of bonus this year. Cale Hughes, I have him at 2 points, round of 12. I do think it's likely if you take the odds, one of those guys places. Like if you said, I think one of the two will place. But conservatively, I put them both at round of 12. I put whoever's at 41. I've heard Jameson wants to move up. Another 2 points. Jordan Williams scored 3 last year. I gave him 4. Teague Travis scored 1.5. I bumped him up to 3 with the thought that maybe Jordan Williams moves up and Carter Young comes in or something like that. Caleb Fish making the round of 12 and scoring 2. I have Hamidi scoring 10, basically replacing Olenek's points. That is a 5th place finish with no bonus or 6th place finish with a major. I have Plot scoring 20. That's a big number, but he scored 20.5 this year. But he bonused the first 4 rounds. And, if he scored 18 and made the finals, that'd still be a great performance, but it'd be a couple points less. I have 197 as either Serber, Christian Carroll, or Haas scoring 2. Last year, Serber was hurt and scored 0. And I just plugged Hendrickson in with the same amounts of points he scored last year. So cumulatively, that gets them to 64.5 instead of 56. So I have columns here. If you want to kind of tell me what you think you would do, we'll kind of see how it adds up.
Well, I think once again, this is where like I would lean heavily on Mark, because he's done these exercises a lot more than I have. So I'm like, oh yeah, Spratley, 100%. Like, love that dude. I think he's gonna be an All-American. But then it's like, well, round of 12 versus All-American points, and it's like this, like the math part of this. And once again, I have never not been a fan of math. Math is not my strong suit. So
I know what the math is. If you tell me what they place, I'll plug in the numbers for you.
So I think that this is a crazy exercise for like everybody that's listening or watching to like really, if you want to be good at this type of stuff, like these are the type of exercises that you can like do with your homies like over the weekend, and you're like, oh yeah, how many points do you think Iowa's going to get or Penn State's going to get this next year if we like think that, whoever it is, like Messenbrink's going to be a national champ, whatever. So I truly believe that like, and I'll go from backwards forwards. I'm going to go with the heavy boys first.
Go ahead.
I think Hendrickson makes finals.
So that's 16. And then does he bonus at all?
100%. I think he scores 24 points for them with all, like everything all included. I think he scores 24 points.
That's 4 pins.
Correct.
You think he pins his way to the finals?
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I think this next weight class is going to be very interesting because I think a lot of people left this weight class. So I think whoever at 97, and I mean, once again, I'm not in the room. I don't know who's all good. I would say Christian Carroll places top 5.
Okay, that's 10. Okay.
There you go. I think Plot at 84. I think he gets 3rd, but I think he also scores 20 points. Instead of making finals, I think he gets 3rd and scores 20.
Okay.
I think Hamidi, All-American, so I'd put him at 10. I think right now, I don't know enough about Caleb Fish. I mean, I've seen him in the bracket, but I haven't watched his game much, so I don't know.
I put him down for what he scored last year, if that helps you.
It does, but I also think you now have Committee as a teammate, Tyler Caldwell as a coach, David Taylor is one of your, like within your weight class to be able to wrestle with. I think Jimmy Kennedy is going to wrestle with you a whole bunch. He's going to be able to work out with Teague Travis. He's going to work out with Hamidi. He's going to work out with Plot. I think that he gets more points, but I think he's still around a 12 guy. So I'm going to put him at like 4 points.
Okay.
So this is where I think I would say I'm going to have a lot of, it could, like we were talking about before, hot and cold weight classes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to err, and once again, I'm going to err on the side of like not a lot of points, but they could absolutely be All-Americans and everything like that.
You're already more aggressive than me, so you're good.
Well, I think at 57, I think 2 points. I think round of 12, I think we get there. I think at this weight class, 2 points. Okay. I think it's the same thing. I think a round of 12 type athlete, get a couple of wins, a couple of losses, nothing crazy. I think at 41, same thing, 2 points. I think 33 is a juggernaut of a weight. I think basically 2 points there.
Okay.
And I think same thing for Spratley. I think he very well could be, I think just 2 points. So what does that add up to?
78.
Yep.
So if you look at this, you can't, and obviously if you're listening, basically the first 6 weight classes were, 1 or 2 points apart. Like we're super close. So, and then actually the first 7, 8 weight classes. The big difference is I have 197 as round of 12. You had him 5th, and you have Hendrickson pinning his way through. I have him making the finals, really like taking 3rd with 2 pins. You have him taking 2nd with 4 pins. So, that's kind of the difference, but it's a significant difference. And 78 points, I think, would have a really good chance of taking 2nd next year.
Yeah, and I think this would be the exercise that, like, if you were going to do this with, let's say, for instance, the reigning national champions, Penn State, I think that one is tougher to determine than this roster.
Because you don't know who's going where. Like,
you have no idea, right? But you're like, well, if Starachi makes finals at 74, 84, 97, pretty much, right?
He's 20. He's won it 4 times. You have to give him first place points.
Correct.
Interesting you took us down the Penn State rabbit hole, because I was talking to somebody. I go, I've never seen a team in my life that is such a prohibitive favorite to win nationals, and no one knows their freaking lineup. Like, if you guess their lineup and I guess their lineup, we're going to be wrong. Like, okay, do they wrestle Luke at 25? Do they wrestle Davis? Do they wrestle Davis at 33 or Nagao? Do they wrestle Bartlett at 41? Most likely, but Kasich can wrestle there. Do they wrestle Van Ness at 49? Yeah, but Kasich. Do they bump Kasich to 57? What else do they do there? Do they bump Van Ness to 57 and wrestle Kasich at 49? Does Messenbrink go down to 57? Does Messenbrink stay at 65? Does Levi go 65? Does Levi go up to 74? Does Facundo go 74 and Levi redshirts? Is it Josh Barr at 84, or is it Starachi? Is it Starachi or one of the Mirasola brothers or somebody like that at 97? It feels like we know Kirkfleet's going to wrestle heavyweight. I feel like what's weird is if you gave me 2 things I thought for sure, 3, I would say Kirkfleet heavyweight, Bartlett 41 because he doesn't have a red shirt, and I think Luke 25 because Braden Davis is getting big. But all those other weights are up in the – and I could be wrong about those 3. But it's just crazy. But again, to do this exercise is if you really want to say, like, well, this team we all go, well, they could have 7 All-Americans. Like, well, you got to pick. Like, and if you do this, once you picked 8 All-Americans that way, you can't pick any more. You know,
Yep. Well, yeah. I think with probably the top teams, you're like, oh yeah, no, this is who we have. Like we have this guy returning, this guy returning, this guy returning, and they're going to stay at those weight classes normally.
Right.
But the way that, I wouldn't even say the portal, but just the way that like kids are either growing, moving around, COVID year, non-COVID year, like red shirt, whatever could happen, injury. Like Shane Van Ness, we forget, or some people may forget, like that guy's a dog. Like,
absolutely
had an amazing run his freshman year, then it ended up getting hurt. And now all of a sudden Kasich comes in, has an amazing run, gets third. What a problem to have, right? So you got 2 guys that are like returning All-Americans that like need to find a home somewhere in your potential national championship lineup. And you also have a returning 4-time national champion in Carter Starachi that could go at 3 weight classes. That's absurd.
Yeah.
So
you have a champion returning at Kirkfleet, a champion returning in Starachi, a champion returning in Levi Haynes, a runner-up who scored a truckload of bonus in Messenbrink. Honestly, give me those 4 guys if Haynes doesn't redshirt, and I think they beat the field.
Well, I think there's, I mean, this would be a great, I think it's going to be like the nation needs to like, and I think this is anything when you look at people that are like dominant, is like you need a couple of dominoes to fall here and there, right? So like Braden Davis not being an All-American last year was probably one of the chinks in the armor to like say like, hey, there's no, like that was something that could happen. Now, once again, the national tournament is the national tournament and wild stuff happens all the time. But, you know, I'm pretty sure that like, you know, like even if some of those guys lose, they're probably getting 3rd or 4th.
Well, the argument for Penn State being better next year than last year is they really didn't score any points at 25 and 33. You know, like, and now like Nagao, I think, was hurt or sick, and he's placed 4th before and turns a lot of people. And Luke Lillidow, Jax Forrest, Marcus Blaze would have been in the mix for the national title last year with Figs and Ayala and all those guys. They've all beaten, like Luke beat Spratley. I understand it's freestyle. I understand it's not the same. Okay. And Spratley's good on top, so that matters. But it's not like these guys are like several levels away from being in the hunt. They're going to be in the hunt right away. You know, Jackson Marcus won't because they're years younger, but not because of skill. Okay, couple of other major things. Andrew Alira stays put in Northern Colorado. Super interesting because he'd made it pretty clear he was going to go to the highest bidder. It'll be interesting to see how, if feelings get hurt or mended and all that sort of thing. Really, really good for probably the health of wrestling. If you're like, hey, we'd like to see all these guys spread out. However, if, you know, he had gone to Oklahoma State or Iowa as 2 examples, dramatically swings the team race. Like if you plug in Andrew Alirez into our formula and you just think he takes 3rd, that's 13.5 points. And I think we both had him projected for 2 or 3. So that's a bump of 10 right there. Couple of other, so Parco goes to Iowa. Parco had said publicly, I get my number or I'm done wrestling. So be curious to see if he got his number. And then Nelson Brands comes back. So now Iowa's lineup is really interesting. Sort of best case scenario. They have Ayala, then Peterson or Strever. Maybe Ryder Block can make 41. Plug Parco in at 49. Siebrecht or Kennedy, if he can make it down to 57. Caliendo 65. PK or Gabe at 74. Nelson Brand slots in perfectly at 84. You can go Glazer 97. Ferrari's still floating around out there. And then Keeter at heavyweight. From a high school credential standpoint, awfully salty lineup. In terms of proven All-Americans, you have an All-American with Ayala, a multiple-time All-American with Parco, a multiple-time All-American with Caliendo, and then a whole bunch of potential there. So and Brands, Brands an All-American. And,
yep.
and one of the things you mentioned this. You didn't directly mention it, but you picked Plott to take third. I don't know if that was a nod to Brands, but Brands has never lost to Plott. Now, Brands had a year off where Plott feels like jumped a level. So I don't think like it's just, hey, next subject. So, but it's certainly an interesting thing to consider. A couple of other so let's talk a little bit about coaching jobs, GT. So Barry Davis, and probably the surprise hire of the summer, is named the assistant coach at Navy. For people, there are people that are watching and listening to this podcast have no idea who Barry Davis is. Barry Davis was an Olympic silver medalist in '84 in the boycott year, 3-time NCAA champ at Iowa, and probably one of the most famous stories how he broke, didn't want to make weight. He was cutting a ton of weight to make 118, and Gable drove to the grocery store and found him as he was checking out. I don't know if you're young. I don't know if you know the story. All right. So just an awesome story. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I would say that the level of shock for Barry, once again, I don't know what Barry's been doing since he's been outside of Wisconsin where he was coaching previously. I don't know what his game has been as of late, but I think as a coach, and as a competitor, Barry Davis is, I don't think a lot of kids really know or have seen him as a competitor or really have recognized him as a coach at Wisconsin, because Bono's been there for quite a while. Yeah. So I think, once again, 1984 Olympic silver medalist. That's a long time ago, boys.
I was 14 and I'm older than you. So
I was 1. I was 1 year old.
I could have won that match. I could have won that match for sure.
Right. But I think there's a part of that that's like, okay. Kerry Colat, the Naval Academy is a great location, great institution. So whoever he brought in was going to be a rock star anyways, because the service academies do such a great job for their athletes. I think also as a mentor, like Barry Davis has seen it and done almost everything in the sport. So as far as a mentorship type position, what an amazing hire, what an amazing, a guy that's been there, done that for everything. Right.
Yeah.
So, NCAAs, on the world and Olympic level, anytime that you can have those type of guys, because there's not everybody is that caliber of a wrestler themselves, and also then has done coaching for a really long time. I think that anytime you can get those type of guys around your program is a good thing. So
sure.
Congratulations to Barry. Once again, I think Kerry Colat is an amazing coach as well. So I think great people combined, going to be really good for Navy.
Other job openings, head coach job at Hofstra is available. Head coaching job at Columbia is available. Princeton is still working on hiring more assistant coaches. So, and there's a couple other things that are rumors, but we won't speculate on that. We'll just talk about what is absolute fact. So those are not top 20 jobs in terms of wrestling. You certainly could talk about the academics of Columbia, like arguably one of the best universities in the world. Maybe not even arguably. Maybe it just is. So it'll be interesting to see who fills these jobs. They're high-level academic institutions. They don't have, decades of historical wrestling success like an Oklahoma State job. But the other part of it is that can create movement from other programs. If you're like the third assistant at a top 20 program and you can go be the head coach at that job, and you think, well, that's the way to move up, right? Which generally has been an effective strategy. If you go become a head coach at a school and make it better. Look at Bono, he went from Chat to South Dakota State, got South Dakota State hopping, and now he's coaching a Big Ten school and just got a contract extension. So, people have seen that path work out. So it'll be interesting to see who ends up there. We won't speculate, but that's definitely a thing. So here's one that's kind of up your alley, GT. I'm going to try to pronounce this guy's name correctly. Masoma and Dean was a Division III national champion from, I think, Wartburg or Augsburg, and finished eligibility and is transferring to Wisconsin. And I say that just because D3 and NAI, sometimes people that don't know the difference kind of, do those synonymously, but a less than Division I institution, a guy who's a national champion is transferring to Division I. I have to imagine all the D2, D3, and NAI coaches are going to probably root hard for that guy, right? Like to say, hey, we want to kind of have proof of concept that these guys can wrestle at the highest level.
Well, I think there's I'm going to put on my Grant Turner hat. This is my own personal opinion.
Okay.
Of course, everybody in the Division III is going to root for that kid to kind of shell out and be like, whatever it is. Like, I hope that he does well.
Yeah.
And also I think everybody in the Division III is like, thank God he's out of our division.
For sure. That's not even debatable, right?
Right. But I think conceptually, and I think this is just my own personal opinion, is that there is a bad stigma, I think, in wrestling where it's Division I or bust. I think it's now, once again, I think Division I wrestling is outstanding. I think some of the best people that are in our country are wrestling in the Division I national tournament. I think also some of our best international wrestlers, but once again, we're on USA Wrestling's podcast. A lot of the Division I caliber type guys are going on to do amazing things in our sport on the international level.
Almost exclusively in men's freestyle, like Tervel and those kind of guys are kind of the lone, like very few exceptions. Yes.
Right. But I think there's aspects of like, if we look at all of the All-Americans when we go to the US Open in April, there's multiple divisions represented, right? So I think the stigma when it comes to, especially this guy that's transferring from Division III, who's been really, really good, undefeated national champion for Warburg, goes on to the Division I national tournament. He's going into the Big Ten, which is an extremely difficult conference. There is a scheduling of duels that not necessarily happens at the Division III level, where you're wrestling, Iowa on Thursday, and then you're wrestling Ohio State on Sunday, and then you're coming back and you're wrestling Purdue at home on Thursday night the next week, right? So I think everybody's going to root for the kid when it comes to like, hey, I hope he does well, because I think that he deserves, some people to like follow him and be like, hey, this guy's representing not only himself, but like, the Division III, because he's a national champion. He's one of the best that they have in that weight class, correct?
100%.
But I think it's a double-edged sword between the Division I's and the non-division, like the multi-division national tournaments and the Division I national tournament, is that like, in order to realistically like look at wrestling as a total, especially within folk style, the lower tier division schools don't get a really opportunity to wrestle those guys all the time.
Yeah.
In a tournament format, right? So
there's no value for the D1 schools doing that, because the matches that count towards criteria for to have enough matches to get a seed, to have enough matches for your gold, silver, bronze certification, those are Division I matches only. And more and more coaches are trying to keep match count down. Plus, the obvious sentence is, if you're a Division I guy and I'm a non-Division I guy and I upset you, that completely screws you up in the rankings. And people say rankings don't count, but rankings definitely impact the coaches' vote. I mean, the coaches are going off of that. So it does have it's almost a no-win situation, for the Division I guy. And it's a no-lose situation for the non-Division I guy.
Well, and I think that's why I think I have such an issue with like I think in my own personal, wrestling's wrestling. Like, I don't care what color of singlet you have on or who sits in your corner. Like, if you're better at folk style than I am, awesome. If you're better at freestyle, like, we don't have divisions in freestyle
or Greco. Yeah.
there is no division. Like you're either good or you're not.
100%.
Like, so I think that when it comes to the sport of wrestling, and this is more of like a theological perspective, is that like, once again, if you're good, you're good. Like when you go to Fargo, when you're a high school person and you go to the best freestyle tournament for your age group category, there are no classes. There's no like 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A, like, oh yeah, well, I won Fargo, but it was in the 2A class. No, one class. We all wrestle in the same division for freestyle and or Greco. So regardless if you grew up in a town of 500 or you were at the best high school in the country, you're in the same bracket at the same tournament at the same time. So I think that in the folk style world, like it gets separated out because we're so division heavy.
Yes.
But I think internationally, when you go to the US Open, or you go to you go to Fargo, or you go to U20s or U17s or U15s, nobody cares what division you are.
It's such a good point. I never thought of it that way, but like even in folk style in high school, right? Like in Missouri, there's 4 classes. I think in Iowa, there's 3 classes. We're talking about boys right now. In girls, in Missouri, there's 2 classes. And I think Iowa, there might be 1 until they get enough teams and participants to get to 2 or 3. But you're right. Like the division. And then the other point you made, like if you look at the Greco team, like Joe Rao was a Division III guy, right? Like he wrestled in Elmhurst. The first time I heard Joe Rao's name was when Mikey Benefield transferred there because Mikey was one of our guys. I didn't even know who Joe Rao was. And Mikey was like, there's a dude on this team who's awesome. And, I was like, oh, well, if you think he's awesome, he's probably pretty freaking good at wrestling. So it is much more of a meritocracy in international style. Like you said, you can be from Grandview and I can be from Merrimack and Mark can be from Iowa Central. And if we can beat the guys from Penn State and Oklahoma State and Iowa and Ohio State and Cornell and Michigan and everybody else I didn't just mention, then we have a chance. When you choose in college, I'm going to Grandview, you're not going to get to wrestle those other schools in a national tournament setting. And unless a few of them pop up at the Luther Open or something, to use a very real example, you're probably not going to see most of them ever. So
and it really just depends on like where you're allowed to wrestle, right? So like, for instance, U23 is like you get a chance to mix it up because there is no divisions. It's college age kids. And you get to go up against everybody, but in the context of only freestyle and Greco. Right. Collegiately, we don't have that. So to bring it full circle to the gentleman that's transferring to Wisconsin, I think everybody is rooting for him. I'm specifically rooting for him. I would have loved to see him stay at Wartburg because I love the Wartburg staff. And I think that like, losing a national champion out of your room is a difficult problem to address, right? Because you're trying to win a national title Division III and you just lost 24 points.
Wartburg will spin it that they're happy for him, but it's tough. It'd be the same thing if it happened at Grandview, right? Like if this guy was a national champion, say even it was like a JUCO transfer, say like he, didn't have the academics to get D1 in, but you graduate with your degree, so now you're D1 eligible. Some JUCO helped him along the way, and then Grandview helped him along the way, and it's tough because it's like, well, hey, we'd like loyalty, but it's also like, hey, you achieved the top of this mountain, and you want to go try to climb the next mountain. And part of what made you great is your belief in yourself. And so, okay, like we see your perspective, even if it's not necessarily what's ideal for us.
Yeah, I think that's all. And I think that there's also some guys that value other things. Like, once again, we've only specifically been talking about the wrestling aspect of this kid's journey. There is an entirely academic aspect of university to university learning, class schedule, opportunities, degrees that we don't even take into consideration when we talk about student athletes. It's like, well, hey, this guy, like, why would he ever like transfer to Michigan? It's like, well, he probably wants to be a dentist and they have the best dental school in the country and he gets an opportunity to go and do that. And it's like, well, he's an All-American, but like a very real possibility he's going to be a dentist for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Like, because this guy is probably not going to end up. I shouldn't say this. If you set odds, it would be long odds that he would be an Olympic gold medalist, and he's more likely going to make life in the business world, make a living, in the business world. And so if, like you said, if Wisconsin can help him down that path and he's halfway towards a master's degree when he leaves or something like that, then for sure. So a
And
couple other.
I don't want to suggest that, once again, he's getting recruited for wrestling. He's not getting recruited for the business school. Like there is an aspect of like nobody
His
from the business
his
college
ability
is like,
to fill molars are incredibly impressive.
right. It's like, hey, we got to get this kid. Like, I want to make sure that people understand that, like, I'm not so blind that this kid doesn't have an athletic prowess that he's going to go there for athletics. Right.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an aspect of it that comes full circle for a kid's decision sometimes. Like, I definitely know that, like, I don't know, Shane Griffith, like when he went to grad school, like he's specific, like he's a grad option. So he's going to be able to get his master's degree from University of Michigan, which, you know, whatever it is, go blue, like they have a very good alumni base. So if you have a master's degree from there, like you're in, right? Same thing with all of the Ivy League schools. They do a really good job with that. So once again, not saying that he's not getting recruited for wrestling.
No.
But there is an aspect to his education too that comes with it.
Well, and Griffith and Woods are two examples of guys that wanted to get their degrees, their undergraduate degrees from Stanford. So for the rest of their life, they're a standard Stanford graduate when they go apply for a job, which is clearly moves you up the packet or the stack of resumes. So 100%. A couple of last loose ends here. Vincenzo Joseph gets hired as the North Carolina RTC coach. Rob Cole and Ramos are building that RTC back up. And then lastly, I was at P&L last week and they did the outdoor duels at Warner Park Papillion, I believe is how you say the suburb of Omaha. So super cool event, 4 mats, 8 teams. They did the 2 pools of 4, 1 round crossover, got to do play-by-play, obviously promoted it on our pod, and it was a warm day, but, other than that, the weather really cooperated. Interesting visiting with, the crew that, followed it afterwards. Mike Mount-Conoco ended up being my roommate for the night. And, he did a lot of the social media stuff. So shout out to those guys for putting on an event that's difficult to execute and executing it very well. I think their next event is in November. So, that whole concept is really high level, what they're attempting to do and doing, like trying to get the best against the best. And really their goal is preparing these kids for having them wrestle high level, meaningful matches before the super meaningful matches, like the US Open, like Fargo, like the regionals, like junior and cadet duels, but ultimately Fargo and like Geneva which are all USA wrestling events. This organization is designed for these clubs to do the best they can at these kind of events. So, shout out to Skinny and the rest of the crew up there for putting that together. So I will say this, and I'll probably mention it more with Mark next week. It's AAPI month, and it's interesting. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. I think I don't want to exclude anybody. I think I'm one of the few, if not the only, Asian American media members in wrestling, and it's never been an issue for me. And, my dad grew up when there was when racial relations were a lot different than they are now. It was an issue for me growing up as a kid, especially a small kid, probably up till I won state, and then nobody messed with me anymore. We've dealt with a lot of stuff that no kid should have to deal with. And I'm not saying my journey was harder than anybody else's, but I want to thank Track Wrestling and USA Wrestling for giving me and then this opportunity, and then ultimately getting to work with guys like you and Mark and Marcus Hain and Andy Hamilton and all the other Alex Steen, all the folks that we have done the podcast with, and that's led to events where we're working with some of the best people in the country, and for me to be a part of that. And I can honestly say this, in the time that I've been in the media, I've never felt like race helped me or hurt me. And I just mean like that. People, like when you tease me, it's about just life. Like it's the size of my font. Right. So, which is cruel but fair. And, But it is something I take seriously, that, hey, I'm one of the few people representing this culture. I know you and I both have a tremendous amount of respect for my dad and how he lives his life and lives sort of by the code of the warrior, of the samurai, the Bushido. And so trying to do that justice is important to me. So I want to thank Gary and Rich specifically, because that's who I reached out to about us coming to this platform. And, it never came up. It was more like, how is this going to work? And, but just to be just treated based on merit, I think, is the best way to say it. Not like they ignored it, not like they have a problem with it, not like they loved it. Like it wasn't like, and it was not an affirmative action move. It was like, hey, Gary Abbott and Scott Casper were the first two people to reach out to me saying you're doing a good job. And I think I've told you that story. I may have told it on the air, but those guys are legends, right? And when you're doing this and you don't know if anybody's watching or listening, you're just out there putting out content and hoping it doesn't stink. For those guys to say that was really meaningful. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that or not.
Well, I think once again, I think it's a month to be celebrated. And once again, as you're part of the media and representing that constituency, like, I think it means a lot. It carries a lot of weight. I do remember talking to, I believe it was Holmes from Flow at the time.
Yeah.
And he was one of the only African-American men in wrestling media as well. And I think, once again, representation matters. I think representation from a standpoint of like the news, being able to dissect wrestling from a different perspective, understanding that we all have different approaches and ways that we've been taught the sport, I think gives volumes to the community. And then once again, I think also the people that you've mentioned, giving an opportunity just based off of that you're good at your craft. Once again, those are giants, right? The Gary Abbotts of the world, the Scott Caspers of the world that were doing this, that are like, I remember hopping on with Scott when I was in, like high school and in college. And it's like, he was doing it on like AM radio. And it's like, that was the medium of the time. And now I think the way that it's accessible for kids to hear, people speak or even watch the podcast on YouTube or wherever that you get your podcasts, it means a lot for like that representation to say like, hey, I can watch this, or, I can relate to David because I've had very similar circumstances growing up as a young man or a young woman. So I think that it does matter, once again, being a part of and being able to jump on board with you boys, like after you guys have had this rolling for a long time, it does mean a lot. So once again, month to be celebrated for you, and also to celebrate you as a person and celebrate you as the host of the show is a big deal. So
massive appreciation. Scott Casper always has you or me on whenever we ask. Gary, I've worked alongside of him at the NCAA doing interviews, World Cup doing interviews, even like at US Open, like he had 3 people get pins, and I was just standing there next to Joe Jeter after he won. He goes, hey, grab her, here's a camera, just hold on to her so we can get the interview. And just being able to be a part of that USA wrestling team, it's the smallest of the cogs, but really appreciate that. And, I think you and me are blessed. Like, we are proud to be the parents or be the sons of our parents. Not everybody has awesome parents. And, a lot of people are maybe tougher than that because they had to overcome less than ideal parenting. But I'm proud to say in life, I'm the son of Ron and Jan Mirikitani, and I'm definitely proud to say in the world of wrestling that those people are my parents, because they're both in the Hall of Fame, and they're Hall of Fame parents and then Hall of Fame contributors to wrestling. So this will be my sentimental, maybe a little sentimental next week with Mark. But besides that, we'll go back to your regular scheduled program. So for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you guys so much. We'll speak to y'all next week.